Welcome to Spiritual Psychology. My name's Renee LaValle McKenna, and I bring my 30-plus years as a recovering addict and ex-crazy person turned therapist and shamanic healer to bring you snackable teachings on spirituality, psychology, and all things personal growth. And today I want to talk about the 4 stages of change. And this model comes out of a book by one of my favorite psychiatrists and spiritual teachers, M. Scott Peck, and his book, The Different Drum. And he talks about this model in relation to groups, societies, and creating community change, because that's what the book is about. But because the macro is almost always a reflection of the micro, this model absolutely applies to individuals as well. And I've found it very helpful to have conceptual models for psycho, spiritual, and emotional processes, because if I intellectually understand what's happening, it can really help me move through the sticky or difficult parts. And that's what I love about this 4 stages of change model, is that it really illuminates the challenges of stage 3, which is where most real change gets derailed. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. And although certainly most of us could use some work in strengthening and maturing our intellect, most of the real change, growth, and evolution that we need is in our emotional, spiritual, energetic, and relational selves. And I kind of throw all of that into the intuitive or non-rational basket. And optimally, our intellect and our intuition, or our rational and our non-rational aspects, are working together as a team. And unfortunately, that's not always the case. I know myself, I suffered tremendous inner discord of self-doubt, self-hatred, self-criticism, a lot of self-focus. In fact, one of the biggest shifts for me conceptually was to move from self-centeredness to other-centeredness. But other-centeredness, thinking about serving and orienting myself toward the needs of others in the extreme, can also be pathological. Pretty much anything in the extreme can become a pathology. And over time, I have become a big fan of balance and what Buddha called the middle way. I have found that moderation in all things is the most sustainable and enjoyable way to move forward in my life. Now, I also happen to know that there are a few things I'm incapable of moderating. For me, drugs and alcohol, any mood or mind-altering substance is off the table for me. I've tried it in just about every configuration there is and have not found a way to drink or drug and keep my dignity or my sanity. There are certain types of sugary, floury things that can be a bit of a challenge as well. So I generally don't eat a lot of donuts or pasta or cheap white cake. Love cheap white cake. And I have to say, emotionally unavailable people who are slightly disapproving of me can still be a tremendous trigger. I used to have a penchant for married men, and that draw toward the emotionally unavailable has mellowed tremendously over the years, but I can still get caught unaware trying to please the unpleasable. Remnants of my relationship with my emotionally unavailable mother, a relationship which has given me a lifetime of work. So moderation, integration, and change. And to create real and lasting change, we may need all of the resources that we have. So again, having our conscious mind on board with the process and understanding what's happening can really help us move through it. So the first stage in conscious change, and change can happen unconsciously or just naturally, and this model can apply to unconscious or natural evolutionary change as well, like moving from childhood through adolescence, or from adolescence into young adulthood, from adulthood into old age, from old age into death. Those are all evolutionary stages that, if we live long enough, we will move through them. Unless you get developmentally stuck, which a lot of people do, and then you have to consciously move through those evolutionary changes. And it can be easy to get stuck and resist the evolutionary life flow, and that causes us suffering. And pain, discomfort, discord is always information that something needs to shift, either internally or externally, and sometimes both. So the first stage of change is realizing there's a problem. And that's often marked by discord, dysfunction, something, dis-ease. But it can also be marked by desire for something more, a yearning, a seeking, an inspiration. In fact, if we really pay attention, we will often see that the roots of our discomfort in any area of our life were born from the seed of inspiration or the desire for something better that we ignored or were too afraid to pursue or didn't believe it was possible. And so we tried to let that seed go dormant or ignore it, often hoping it would go away, or telling ourselves that's ridiculous, or just sheer terror at the prospect of the level of change that would be needed to get to our dreams and deepest desires. And when we ignore that still small voice, that quiet inspiration or yearning of our own soul, it doesn't go away, and it will start to become necrotic. And necrotic is when something starts to kill the other cells that are around it. And necrosis can be quite dangerous because it can become systemic. My mother and father-in-law were great adventurous birders, and they did some trip to Australia looking at exotic birds in the outback. My mother-in-law woke up the day they were leaving for their plane ride back to the U.S. with a spider bite on her knee. And there was nothing she could think to do about it except clean it, put a Band-Aid on it. And they get on their 20-hour plane ride, and by the time they landed in San Francisco, her knee was twice its normal size. And the next day, the area around the bite was starting to turn a nasty purple-black, and she was bit by a necrotic spider. The venom kills or dissolves the tissue around the bite, and they had to run to the hospital and do some pretty nasty tissue removal, because untreated, she could have lost her leg or worse. Yikes. I've had some people in my life who were like necrotic spiders. Some of those emotionally unavailable men. Gotta cut them babies out. Anyway, so from my perspective, our deepest responsibility is to be the steward of our own souls in this lifetime. And our soul often doesn't give a crap about our personality or our ego self. And if we don't listen to, support, or nurture our soul substance, it will manifest in monstrous, demonic, and necrotic forms in our life, like addiction, narcissism, codependent or abusive relationships, feeling victimized, underappreciated at work, in family, or community. And all dysfunction or discomfort is information. There's usually a misguided attempt to manage something, and the stage one of change is to get honest, to look deeply within ourselves and admit, accept, or become willing to do things differently. Perhaps to even become different, to grow. Now, often the whole fabric of our life is interwoven together, and we may know on some level that if we change one area, the whole thing will probably unravel. But if we want real change, we need to let go of the outcome and just be with what is. Because in real change, evolution, and growth, we are creating something new, which means it hasn't existed before, and thus we can't imagine what it will be. So lots of times when we realize a change is called for, we look right to stage 4, we can't imagine it, and so we go back to self-medicating, doubling down on our dysfunction, or just telling ourselves, well, this is the bed you made, you better lay in it, even if it's pissy and shitty. So lots of people stay in stage 1, wishing for change, desiring change, but too filled with fear or lack of power to move forward to stage 2. And stage 2 is where we take action to create change. We put our energy, our time, our resources toward doing something differently. Might go to therapy, start exercising, hire a professional organizer, or stop smoking pot and start meditating instead. And taking positive, constructive action in the physical world is imperative, but we often don't take it deep enough. I grew up in a family of hoarders and actually worked as a housekeeper and professional organizer for over a decade. And both my relatives and my clients were often obsessed with things like the Container Store, buying a new organizing system, which can be similar to the many fad diets that I did when I was gaining and losing hundreds of pounds. But the presenting dysfunction is the tip of the proverbial iceberg. And the rest of the iceberg is us and our own unresolved emotional, spiritual issues. And although the motives may be good for creating a superficial change, it often is just that. It's superficial, and the deeper dysfunctions will, over time, rear their heads again. And over time, I have come to observe that most calls for growth and change have to do with, again, supporting and expressing our most authentic or soul-level self in the world. Most people feel that their deepest truth is dangerous, unacceptable, impossible. And yet nurturing, supporting, and pursuing our own dreams and goals is the only path to joy and fulfillment that I'm aware of. And if we don't do it, we will suffer. And so if you're not suffering, you're probably doing fine. Until it's time to grow. And life always calls us to grow, just in its natural unfolding. And so when we take steps for real change, it brings us to stage 3, chaos, creativity, and emptiness, the place of the unknown. And this is where most people falter. I have many clients that will come right to the edge of stage 2 and look into the darkness of the unknown and stop their work with me. It's too much. They go back to Netflix and a bottle of wine every night. Or sign up for another kind of therapy or spiritual growth class, looking for a way around that pregnant void that is the necessary and mysterious part of authentic creative change. I have a client, brilliant man, woefully underemployed, was telling me that one of his interns from 5 years ago is now making $50,000 more than him a year and 3 tiers up from him in the company. And he recently told them that he would like to do more project management work, and the company told him, sorry, we can't do that for you right now. And so the message is that he needs to leave that job and pursue the paths that his interns have taken, of learning and growing professionally and being compensated and recognized for that and finding fulfilling work. But he's terrified to leave. He's also in a marriage that's unfulfilling and a little bit abusive with an alcoholic wife. She's a functional alcoholic, but it became apparent that this job is like a linchpin, kind of holding this whole system of him being depleted and undervalued in all areas of his life. And he's so drained and discouraged at work that when he comes home, he has no energy to do anything else. And although that's true, it's actually a system that he's participating in of draining away his own life energy that keeps him stuck. And often staying stuck is an old defensive structure that's attempting to keep us safe. Safe from risk, safe from moving out of our old belief structures of unworthiness, undeserving, and underbeing. I did a podcast on underbeing recently, podcast 108. And so he's right in stage 2. And it's a question mark whether he will be willing to actually make the physical change necessary to create the deeper internal change that he really seeks for freedom and fulfillment, joy, and feeling appreciated. And once we make that change, it will often throw us immediately into stage 3 of the unknown. And here's the thing to know, that when change is called for, there is no way around discomfort. It's just a choice of which kind of discomfort that we want. Do we want the discomfort of what's familiar, of stagnation and slowly devolving, resisting the natural flow and evolution of life that's calling us forward for our own highest good? That's a particular kind of suffering. Or are we willing to take the discomfort of moving outside of our comfort zone or outside of what's familiar? The discomfort of risk, the unknown, the chaos of not being in control, being called to trust the universe, God, the life force, that something will create itself or be born from this pregnant void. And it can be really disorienting. I know it has been for me, having made radical change more than once in my life, more than twice in my life. In fact, I'm really fully on the other side of leaving a 19-year relationship. And there was a multi-year period of kind of an identity crisis. Tremendous creativity came out of that as well. And I have a whole new life. And I'm totally killing it, I just got to say. So good. But it was excruciating. But it was excruciating being in a dead marriage as well. So there's no way around difficulty. And growing to understand that is an imperative part of full adulthood and emotional maturity. If we're looking for an easier, softer way, it will lead us down dead ends. But the stage 3 of being in the unknown is the most powerful, and the more deeply we can surrender to it, in some ways, the more quickly we move through it. But when we ask for or pursue change on a soul level, it is like a new life being created. And the change that we make in stage 2 is like the egg being fertilized of our own soul's purpose or destiny. And the embryo attaches itself to the universal womb, which will nourish, grow, and develop that new way of being until it's ready to be birthed in the world. And although I personally loved being pregnant the 2 times I was, I know a lot of people that struggle with it. So it's a different process for each of us. And whatever that process is, it's part of our development, growth, and learning. And there have been times I've made radical change and sailed through the unknown. And there have been times when I have made big changes in my life and the darkness was overwhelming. And when I became overwhelmed, it forced me to ask for help or surrender even more things that ultimately served my highest good. So to submit ourselves to the mystery of the unknown and allow the child, the new creation, the birth of a new life or way of being in stage 4. And we don't necessarily get to control the process. My first child, I spent 9 months trying to not have a C-section because I was born by C-section and I felt like that had a lot to do with never bonding with my mother. I had a midwife and a birthing tub and drank pregnancy tea and did yoga 3 times a week till the day before I went into labor. And after 62 hours of unproductive labor, I had a C-section. I couldn't control that birthing process. And because I was able to surrender myself to it, that C-section was one of the most profound and transformative spiritual experiences I have ever had in my life. So what do we know about what's good for us? Often the things I'm most afraid of are the things that most need to happen. And when I move through them, I am grateful and amazed. And so stage 4 is the new life. It's the outcome, the gift, the new dawn, the baby, the fruiting plant that has been growing from the seeds of stage 1. Bearing its bounty to nourish and inspire ourselves and those in our life. And so I encourage you to consider where you are being called to change in your life and where you may be at in this 4-stage process. Are you in discomfort and desire? Stage 1. Are you making positive, constructive change in stage 2? Have you moved into the unknown, the universal womb of stage 3? Or are you living your best life in stage 4 for right now until we're called to go through that process again? Thank you so much for listening. If you like this podcast, please like, review, or share it with a friend. I'm exploring the app Insight Timer and posting some free guided meditations on there if you want to check it out. You can also find me on Instagram at Renee LaValle McKenna. Feel free to send me a DM if you want to learn more about how spiritual psychology work might benefit you in your life. Or you can shoot me an email, info@reneemckenna.com, to learn about my mentorship program. Blessings on your path until we meet again. This is Renee LaValle McKenna for Spiritual Psychology.